The silver blade touched Tavia Noct's shadow before it touched her skin. That was the mercy of the Dragon Court. They did not cut flesh first. Flesh belonged to the body, and even servants were allowed to keep a body if the crown still had use for it. But a shadow was different. A shadow could hide forbidden bargains. A shadow could carry curses. A shadow could remember doors the palace had ordered sealed. Tavia's shadow had been pointing toward the sealed west stair all morning. No one else had noticed. Servants were trained not to notice anything that might make them witnesses. But Tavia had seen it while carrying ash water through the lower corridor before dawn. Her own darkness stretching sideways against the light, thin and stubborn, reaching toward a staircase that had not existed on any palace map since before she was born. By sunset, the Shadow Council had come for her. Now she stood barefoot inside a circle of powdered silver in the center of the Ember Hall, wrists bound behind her with servant cord. Not chains. Chains were for criminals with names worth recording. Cord was for palace property. The hall rose around her in black marble and ancient dragon bone, every candle reflected beneath her feet like a trapped star. Above the throne, banners of burned silk hung without stirring. No wind entered that room. No mercy either. High Warden Orathan held the shadow blade. It was narrow, silver, and bright enough to make the darkness around it shrink. By decree of the Shadow Council, he said, his voice calm enough to sound sacred, the oath-bound servant Tavia Noct is judged infected by unauthorized darkness. Her shadow will be removed, purified, and sealed beneath the west furnace until the Dragon King's court is satisfied no forbidden will remains inside it. Tavia looked down, not because she was meek, but because she was watching what they meant to steal. Her shadow lay beside her feet, still and dark under the court lights. It had always seemed too deep for a girl who owned nothing. Other servants whispered that candles bent strangely around it. Once, when Tavia was 12, a locked pantry door had opened after her shadow slipped beneath it. She had been beaten for theft, even though she had taken nothing. After that, she learned not to stand too close to doors. But her shadow had never harmed anyone. It had only stayed with her. That was more than most things in the palace had done. On the throne above the hall, Dragon King Kaelor sat with one hand wrapped around the black armrest, his face unreadable beneath the jagged crown of ember steel. He was feared across the Ash Kingdoms for the dragonfire in his blood, the armies beneath his banner, and the Tavia saw the strain at his jaw, the tension in his gloved hand, the way his gaze kept returning to the silver circle around her feet, as if the powder had been drawn around his own throat. Orathan noticed. "Do not seek pity from His Majesty," the warden said. The king signed the order. The words landed cleanly. Tavia had expected cruelty from the council. She had expected fear from nobles who crossed themselves whenever her shadow stretched too far. But the king's order was different. She had carried water past his war chamber. She had seen him bleeding alone after rites no one named. Once, when fever took her in the lower laundry, a black cloak had appeared beside her cot, heavy enough to keep the cold from her bones. She had let herself wonder who left it there. That had been foolish. Tavia lifted her chin. "If my shadow is guilty," she said, her voice rough from disuse, "make it answer before you cut it." The hall tightened around the words. Servants were not forbidden to speak during punishment. They were simply taught that speaking made punishment longer. Orathan's eyes sharpened. "Your shadow has no standing in court. Then why is the court afraid of it?" For the first time, Kaelor looked fully at her. Not with mercy. With recognition fighting through something locked, Orathan stepped closer, the blade angled downward. Defiance is often mistaken for courage by those too lowborn to understand law. "I understand law." Tavia's wrists burned where the cord bit her skin, but she did not lower her head. Oath-bound servants are crown property. Crown property cannot be destroyed without naming the value lost. A council clerk stopped writing. The silence turned dangerous. It was a small law, an ugly one. A law made to count broken tools, dead horses, burned grain, and servants injured beyond labor. But Tavia had cleaned ink from archive floors for half her life. She knew the laws nobles forgot because they had never needed them. "If you cut my shadow," she said, "you must name what it is worth." The blade paused, only for a breath. But in that breath, the candles nearest Tavia bent toward her shadow like reeds toward deep water. Kaelor rose from the throne. Guards shifted, spears lowered. Somewhere high above, old bone creaked as if the palace itself had drawn in air. "Enough," Kaelor said. His voice was quiet. It crossed the hall like heat under stone. Orathan did not turn. "Majesty, the rite has begun. If it stops before the first cut, any darkness attached to the servant may seek a stronger host. Then let it seek me." Tavia's breath caught. Kaelor descended one step from the throne. The shadow beneath him moved wrong. It should have stretched behind him, crowned by firelight. Instead, it dragged at his heels like a locked thing, trying to remember where it belonged. Along its edge, thin lines appeared, not wings, not claws, but door-shaped seams opening and closing too quickly to count. Orathan saw them. For one instant, fear crossed his face. Then he changed tactics with the ease of a man who had prepared for mercy. "Measure the value," he ordered. 3 black-robed wardens stepped from behind the pillars, each holding a chain made of dull glass links. Shadow chain. Tavia had seen one only once, wrapped around a dead prisoner whose body cast no darkness afterward. The first warden threw the chain. It struck Tavia's shadow. Pain tore through her knees so violently she almost fell, though nothing had touched her body. Her shadow buckled under the glass links, pinned to the marble. The candles burst higher. Every flame in the hall turned thin and white. Then something opened beneath Kaelor. Not a wound, a door. It appeared inside his shadow, a narrow black seam with silver light leaking through its edges. Kaelor staggered down another step, one hand clamped over his chest. The sound that ripped from him was not a command, not a roar, not the voice of a king. It was the sound of a man hearing a room inside himself unlock. The court froze. Behind Kaelor, his shadow split wider, and for a heartbeat Tavia saw stairs descending where no stairs should be. Wet stone. A child's handprint on a sealed wall. A dragon-shaped flame trapped behind black glass. Then the image vanished as Orathan lifted the silver blade. "Seal the hall," he ordered. "No one leaves until the servant names what door she opened inside the king." Tavia forced herself upright against the chain's pain. Her shadow trembled beneath the glass links. Kaelor stood half-bent at the base of the throne, breathing like every breath had to pass through a locked room first. His crown had slipped crooked across his brow. He looked at Tavia with horror, but not accusation. With memory trying to return, Orathan pointed the blade at her shadow. "Speak, servant. What did your darkness do to His Majesty?" Tavia stared at the sealed west stair, carved nowhere and remembered by everything. Then she understood the first terrible rule. Her shadow did not carry dragonfire. It carried forbidden doors. And one of those doors had been hidden inside the Dragon King. "No," she said, voice shaking but clear. "Do not ask what my shadow did to him." The seam in Kaelor's darkness opened again. This time, from somewhere beyond it, a child began to cry. Tavia looked at Orathan. "Ask who locked a room inside your king." The moment Tavia's shadow was chained, a sealed door appeared inside the Dragon King's darkness. It did not open fully. It breathed. A thin silver line cut through the blackness at Kaelor Varen's feet, narrow as a knife slit, bright as moonlight seen from beneath water. The door had no frame, no handle, no hinges. It simply existed where no door should have been, carved into the living dark that dragged behind the Dragon King like a secret refusing burial. Kaelor's hand tightened over his chest. He did not fall again, but the effort of remaining upright turned his face pale beneath the ember steel crown. Each breath he drew sounded like stone scraping across stone. Tavia felt the chain bite deeper into her shadow. Pain climbed her body without touching her skin. It entered through the floor, through the darkness pinned beside her feet, through the hidden place where a person learned that her shadow was still part of her even if the court called it property. Her knees trembled. Her wrists burned against the cord, but she kept her eyes on the door inside Kaelor's shadow. Something behind it had recognized her. Not the court, not the king. "Here." High Warden Orathan moved first. "Cut the servant's shadow from the floor," he ordered. "Now." The warden with the silver blade stepped forward, but Kaelor's voice stopped him. "No." It was not loud. It did not need to be. The blade paused above Tavia's pinned darkness. Orathan turned slowly. His calm had returned, but it sat too tightly on his face. "Majesty, by Shadow Council statute, An unauthorized key must be destroyed before it locates a royal lock. The words passed through the hall like frost. Unauthorized key. Tavia's fear sharpened into understanding. They do not think my shadow is cursed, she said. Orathan looked at her with open contempt. You are not permitted to interpret court law. Tavia swallowed the pain and lifted her chin. They think it opens something. The sealed door inside Kaelor's darkness pulsed once. Kaelor flinched. Tavia saw it. Orathan saw it too. The warden's mouth hardened. That is enough. He lifted the blade again. This time, Kaelor stepped off the last thrown stair and placed his bare hand directly onto the glass chain, pinning Tavia's shadow. The hall seemed to lose all sound. White fire snapped up his arm. Kaelor's jaw locked. The veins in his wrist darkened, not red, not black, but deep gold, as if his dragonfire had been forced backward through his blood. The pain should have made him release the chain. Instead, he closed his fingers around it. Tavia stared at him. He had signed the order that brought her here. He had sat above her while Orathan named her darkness unclean. He had waited until the blade was almost down, and now he was burning for touching the thing that hurt her. That did not undo anything, but it changed the room. Orathan's eyes flashed. Majesty, remove your hand. Kaelor did not. Tell me what door that is. There is no door. The silver line inside his shadow widened by a finger's breadth. A sound slipped through, a child crying. Tavia's lungs tightened. Kaelor's face changed so quickly it frightened her. Not fear, not shock, something older, something torn open from beneath the man he had trained himself to be. I know that voice, he whispered. Orathan stepped between him and the door. You know nothing beyond what the crown has preserved. Tavia's shadow twisted beneath the chain, not trying to escape, pointing toward the sealed west stair beyond the hall walls, toward a place the palace maps denied, toward the same direction it had reached for all morning. Tavia understood then what Orathan feared. Not her strength, not her blood, not some hidden throne claim. He feared direction. He feared that her shadow knew where the palace had hidden its missing rooms. She forced herself to speak. What is behind that door? Orathan's gaze cut to her. Silence. No. Her voice shook, but it carried. You put my shadow in chains. You called it evidence. Evidence answers questions. A few nobles shifted uneasily. No one defended her, but no one laughed either. Kaelor's hand trembled on the chain. Smoke rose from his palm. Answer her. Orathan leaned closer to him and lowered his voice, though not enough to hide it from Tavia. If that door opens, Majesty, you will not remember a crime. You will become one. Kaelor's eyes turned cold. What did you take from me? The question cracked something in Orathan's mask. Only for an instant. Then the High Warden raised his hand, and the three Shadow Wardens pulled their chains in different directions. Tavia cried out as her shadow stretched thin across the marble. The sealed door inside Kaelor's darkness began to close. Kaelor staggered. His hand slid, skin burning against glass. Tavia felt a choice form like a blade laid in her palm. If she fought the chain, the pain would tear through both of them. If she let it close, Orathan would cut her shadow and bury whatever door it had found. She was an oath-bound servant. The court had spent her whole life teaching her to survive, by lowering her eyes, giving up questions, and letting powerful men decide how much of her could be taken. Not this time. She turned her face toward her shadow. Show the first room, she whispered. The chain tightened until the edges of her vision went white. Orathan lunged with the blade. Kaelor caught his wrist. The silver edge stopped a breath above Tavia's darkness. Kaelor's hand bled where the blade's light kissed him, but he did not release Orathan. I signed the order, he said, each word forced through pain, because Orathan said your shadow would be cut in private before dawn. Tavia looked at him. The hall had become too still. And you believed him? Kaelor's eyes met hers. No. His voice roughened. I needed him to do it where your shadow could answer. There it was. Not apology. Confession. Tavia felt it strike deeper than Orathan's chain. The king had not been fooled. He had not been helpless. He had opened the court like a trap and placed her pain at the center of it, hoping the truth would walk through. Her throat tightened. Then you use my pain as a door. Kaelor's grip on Orathan faltered. The answer was honest. It still did not open the door between them, but her shadow heard her. The darkness beneath her feet rose, not like a beast, not like smoke, but like a threshold remembering its shape. The powdered silver circle cracked. The glass chain rang once, twice. The sealed line inside Kaelor's shadow tore open wide enough for everyone in the Ember Hall to see through. A room appeared beyond it, small, windowless, built of wet black stone. On the far wall, a child's handprint glowed silver beside another handprint, smaller and darker. Two shadows lay on the floor, stitched together with thread made of ember light. One belonged to a boy wearing a prince's sleeping robe. The other belonged to a little girl in servant gray. Their bodies were gone from the memory, but their shadows were still holding hands. Tavia stopped breathing. She knew that gray. She knew the way the sleeves swallowed the child's wrists. She knew the small dark handprint on the wall. Orathan's face went bloodless. "Close it," he said. No one moved. From inside the sealed room, a child's voice whispered through the open door. Not crying now. Calling. Tavia. The little girl's shadow answered by reaching back. Kaelor went rigid. Because the voice was a child's, but it was also his. The door inside the Dragon King's shadow opened wider. And behind it, something bound in black glass dragged one golden eye awake. Kaelor's dragon had not been sleeping inside his blood. It had been locked behind a door only Tavia's shadow remembered. The golden eye behind the black glass stared through the opened room, not at the crown on Kaelor's brow, not at the wardens holding their chains, not at the nobles pressed back against the pillars as if distance could save them from truth. It looked at the darkness pinned beside Tavia's bare feet. Her shadow answered by trembling. The glass chain tightened around it, and pain flashed up Tavia's spine so sharply that the wet black room beyond the door blurred. She tasted iron. Her knees bent, but she refused to fall. If she fell, Orathan would call it proof of corruption. If she screamed, the council would call it confession. If she stayed silent, they would cut until silence was all she had left. So she looked into the black glass instead. Behind it, something huge shifted in a space too small to hold it. Not a body, not fully. A dragon made of memory, ember, and old restraint pressed one golden eye against the glass wall, its pupil narrowing as it found Kaelor. Then it spoke, not in the roar of beasts, in the voice of a child who had been locked away before he learned how to beg. Kaelor still. The name passed through the Ember Hall like a hand reaching into a grave. No one called him that, no one living. The court knew him as Dragon King Kaelor Varen, ash-crowned sovereign, lord of the 9 furnaces, keeper of the royal flame. But the creature behind the glass used a boy's name, soft and broken and forbidden by intimacy. Kaelor's fingers clenched around the shadow chain until the glass links bit deeper into his palm. Blood slid between his knuckles. He did not seem to feel it. "I know that voice," he said. Orathan moved fast. "Destroy the key." The 3 wardens pulled at once. Tavia's shadow stretched thin across the marble, dragged away from the open door. The memory room flickered. The smaller handprint on the wet wall dimmed. The little girl's shadow inside the room reached back toward Tavia, but the ember thread stitching it to the prince's shadow burned brighter, holding both children to the floor of a past no one had been meant to see. Tavia understood what Orathan meant before the blade lowered. He was not trying to kill her. He was trying to erase the way in. The silver blade dipped toward the narrow place where her shadow touched the open threshold. If he severed that line, the room would close. The dragon memory would sink back behind black glass. Kaelor would remain a king with a hollow place in him, and Tavia would become a servant with less than even darkness left to her name. Kaelor released Orathan's wrist only to step between the blade and Tavia's shadow. The blade struck his forearm. Silver light tore across his sleeve and burned into skin. The scent of scorched cloth and dragon blood filled the hall. Kaelor's jaw tightened, but he did not move aside. Orathan's eyes flashed with something too old to be surprise. "Majesty, if that memory opens completely, it will not return your dragon to you. It will return what we cut out of you to survive it." Kaelor's voice dropped. "You cut something out of me? We saved the kingdom. You cut something out of me?" This time the words carried fire. The candles nearest the throne guttered black. The crown on Kaelor's head gave a faint metallic groan, as if the ember steel itself had remembered the boy beneath it. Tavia could have let him rage. A king's anger could buy her a moment. A king's violence could break Orathan's hand, scatter the wardens, tear open the hall. But rage would not answer the room. Rage would give Orathan exactly what he wanted. A dangerous king, a corrupted servant, a reason to seal both. No, Tavia said. Kaelor turned toward her. His eyes were bright with pain, but he listened. That unsettled the court more than his fire. Tavia drew a breath through the chain's pull. Do not kill him before he names what he did. Orathan's mouth thinned. Kaelor stared at her as if she had struck him and saved him in the same motion. What do you want shown next? He asked. Not commanded. Asked. The question hurt worse than pity, because it gave her back a piece of herself in front of the court that had built its laws on taking pieces. Tavia looked at the small shadow in the sealed room, the little girl in servant gray whose body was missing from the memory, whose darkness still reached toward the boy beside her. Show who stitched us, she said. Her shadow obeyed. The open door widened with a sound like wet stone cracking under winter. The room beyond sharpened. The black glass wall glowed from within. The two child shadows on the floor became clearer, still holding hands, though their bodies were gone. Ember thread pierced them wrist to wrist, ankle to ankle, heart shadow to heart shadow. Then figures appeared around them. Not ghosts. Records. Memory had no mercy when forced to testify. Orathan stood younger in the room, his hair darker, his hands steady and unstained. Around him gathered 6 members of the old Shadow Council, their faces hidden behind black veils sewn with gold thread. A boy lay asleep on a stone table, a prince's robe twisted around his small body. Across from him, a little girl in servant gray knelt awake, held by 2 wardens, while tears ran silently down her face. Tavia's breath stopped. She remembered no such room, but her body did. Her wrists ached where no hands held them now. Her throat tightened around a scream she had swallowed years ago. Her shadow strained toward the child on the floor like a mother toward a stolen grave. The younger Orathan lifted a needle made of black glass. The prince's dragon will burn through his mind before his 10th winter, the memory of Orathan said. His will is too strong. His shadow refuses royal command. The throne cannot survive a king who cannot be governed. One veiled counselor asked, And the servant child? Empty enough to hide what he cannot carry, Orathan answered. The counselors did not look at the little girl. They looked at the space inside her they could use. Tavia's vision blurred. Empty. That was what they had called her all her life in softer words. Quiet. Useful. Unremarkable. Oath-bound. A girl whose pain took up less space than noble inconvenience. Kaelor made a broken sound. The memory continued. The black glass needle descended. Ember thread pulled from the boy's shadow first, bright and violent, and the child on the stone table convulsed without waking. The little girl screamed then, not loud enough for the palace to remember, loud enough for her shadow to keep. Kaelor's dragon memory slammed against the black glass. Cracks spread like lightning. In the Ember Hall, every shadow recoiled except Tavia's. Hers rose against the chain, thin but unbroken, and reached toward the little girl's shadow inside the memory. The little girl reached back. Their fingers touched through the open door. Pain vanished for one impossible heartbeat. In its place came a memory that was not image, but feeling, cold stone beneath small knees. Kaelor's child. Hand finding hers in the dark, his whisper against terror. Do not let go. She had obeyed him for years without remembering why. Tavia stumbled. Kaelor caught her before she struck the marble. His arm went around her carefully, as if he had no right to hold what he had helped endanger. His blood from the blade wound smeared against the cord binding her wrists. He looked down at her, and whatever apology rose in him died before it became insult. Good. She did not need his apology yet. She needed his truth. Across the hall, Orathan lifted his voice. You see? This is why the key must be destroyed. The king's unstable dragon, will was placed where it could do no harm. The servant survived because the council gave her purpose. Without us, he would have burned the realm, and she would have remained nothing. Tavia straightened out of Kaelor's hold. Nothing does not remember doors, she said. The words struck the open threshold. The black glass cracked again. Behind it, the golden eye widened. A second eye opened beside it. The dragon memory pressed closer, its shape still trapped, still incomplete, but no longer silent. Kaelor turned on Orathan, blood running from his forearm to his fingers. Release her shadow. Orathan's expression hardened into law. If I release it, your dragon returns to its first vessel. Kaelor still. Tavia felt the chain pulse around her shadow. First vessel, not Kaelor. Here. The memory dragon behind the glass dragged in a breath that shook dust from the dragon bone ceiling. Then it spoke, and this time the voice was no child's whisper. She was not the key. The black glass split from floor to ceiling. She was the cage, and every lock in the Ember Hall turned toward her. The dragon court stopped fearing Tavia's shadow when it learned she was the cage. It began fearing what would happen if she opened. Every lock in the Ember Hall turned toward her with a sound like teeth grinding in stone. Door bolts along the walls twisted without hands. Iron clasps on evidence chests snapped awake. The great furnace gates at the far end of the hall shuddered against their hinges. Even the small golden latch on Kaelor's crown clicked once, as if something inside the ember steel had recognized its keeper. Tavia stood in the silver circle with her shadow pinned beneath glass chains, and for the first time in her life, the palace did not look at her as property. It looked at her as a door that might let something out. Orathan saw the shift and seized it. "Containment law," he said sharply. The words struck the hall harder than a command. The warden straightened. The clerks reached for fresh ink with shaking hands. Nobles who had been backing away stopped where they were, suddenly grateful for a law old enough to hide behind. Orathan lifted the silver blade, but this time he did not aim it like an executioner. He aimed it like a man claiming ownership. "By the 9th Shadow Statute," he declared, "any living vessel proven to contain unstable royal dragon will belongs to the Shadow Council until the threat is purified, transferred, or destroyed." Kaelor's eyes went black with fury. "She belongs to no council. She was made to contain what you could not survive." Orathan's voice carried no shame. "That made it worse. If she opens, Majesty, your dragon will floods through a servant body never meant to bear it. Her bones will burn before your memory finishes returning." The glass chains pulsed. Tavia felt the truth of the danger, not as words, but as heat beneath her skin. Behind the black glass, Kaelor's dragon memory pressed closer. Not attacking, waiting. Each breath it took pulled at the shadow beneath her feet. She could feel something vast on the other side of herself, not inside her body, not in her blood, but locked behind the darkness that had followed her since childhood. A cage was not empty. A cage was full by design. Kaelor reached for the nearest chain. Tavia saw what he meant to do before his fingers closed. "Don't." He stopped. Only one word from her, and the Dragon King stopped in front of the court that had once made servants kneel until their knees bled. Tavia's throat tightened, but she did not soften. "If you break it wrong, he is right. It will tear through me." Kaelor's hand remained suspended above the chain. Blood still ran from the cut on his forearm, dripping onto the marble beside her shadow. "Then tell me how to break it right." Orathan's mouth curled. "She cannot. Cages do not choose, they hold." Tavia looked at him. All her life, the palace had used different words for the same sentence. Servant, vessel, property, empty, useful, cage. She turned toward the black glass. What happens if the cage opens? The dragon memory's golden eyes fixed on her. For a moment it did not answer. Its claws scraped behind the cracked barrier, slow and heavy, as if even memory had to decide how much pain a living girl could survive. Then its voice filled the hall. "The king remembers what he begged me to burn. Kaelor still." Tavia looked at him and saw the boy from the memory beneath the crown. The hand that had found hers in the dark. The whisper she had obeyed for years without knowing why. "Do not let go." Orathan cut in quickly. "Selective memory is a corrupted witness. The creature behind that glass is not your dragon, Majesty. It is the wild will we removed so you could live." "So I could obey," Kaelor said. "So the realm could endure. So you could govern me." The candles snapped blue. Heat rolled across the floor. Guards shifted away from the throne, but Tavia held up one bound hand as far as the court allowed. "Not rage," she said. Kaelor's fire stilled at the edge of eruption. His restraint cost him. She saw it in the tremor of his shoulders, in the way his jaw locked against power that wanted to answer pain with ruin. Good. Let it cost him. He had used her pain as a door. Now he could learn to stand before that door without forcing it open. Tavia faced the dragon memory again. Show only what he asked you to burn. Orathan's eyes widened. No, not panic. Recognition. Tavia had chosen correctly. The black glass shuddered. One of the locks floating in the air turned slowly toward her, an old iron thing shaped like a dragon's closed mouth. It drifted down, passing through the silver circle without touching it, and stopped before her chest. The chain around her shadow tightened in warning. Kaelor stepped closer, but did not touch. What price? Tavia asked. The dragon memory lowered its head behind the glass. One truth for one wound, it said. Open one lock, and the body remembers where the lie was stored. Before Kaelor could object, Tavia said, Mine. His face hardened. No, you asked me what I wanted shown. Her voice shook, but she did not let it break. I choose the price. That wound belongs to me. No, she said. The lie was stored in me. The lock opened. Pain struck her left shoulder like a blade made of cold fire. Tavia gasped and nearly folded, but Kaelor caught the chain instead of her body, taking enough of the backlash that the glass links burned fresh lines across his palm. He did not steal her choice. He only paid beside it. The memory changed. The room of wet black stone returned, but now the children had bodies. A small Kaelor thrashed against the stone table, no longer asleep. His eyes glowed gold through tears. The dragon-shaped flame above him twisted violently, bound by black glass threads. Across the room, little Tavia knelt with wardens gripping her arms. She was crying without sound. Young Orathan lifted the needle. The child prince saw her. Everything in him changed. Not her, young Kaelor screamed. Put it back in me. Burn me instead. The council ignored him. The dragon flame above the boy bent toward the little girl, refusing the needle, refusing the stitch. Kaelor sobbed once, furious and terrified. Protect her, he begged the dragon. If they take you, protect her. Do not let her die. The dragon answered by wrapping its flame around both shadows. Not prison. Promise. Then Orathan drove the black glass needle through the joined dark and turned the promise into a lock. The memory shattered. Tavia staggered backward, her shoulder burning as if the old needle had just entered her flesh. Kaelor caught himself on one knee, one hand still wrapped around the chain, his face stripped of every royal mask. Orathan stepped forward, pale with rage. Enough! One lock has opened, no more. Tavia breathed through the pain and looked at Kaelor. He remembered now. Not everything. Enough. The Dragon King lifted his head slowly, and when he looked at Orathan, he was not looking as a ruler at a counselor. He was looking as a boy at the man who had buried him alive inside his own throne. The first lock opened, and Kaelor remembered screaming her name while Orathan buried them both. Kaelor did not rise from the marble as a king. He rose like the boy beneath the crown had finally found the man who buried him. The chain in his burned hand cracked once, and the sound traveled through every lock turned toward Tavia. The old iron mouths trembled in the air. The furnace gates shuddered. Somewhere beneath the ember hall, a sealed stair groaned behind stone that had pretended for years it was only wall. Orathan stepped back, but not from fear, from calculation. Majesty, he said, voice low and precise. You remember pain. Pain. Kaelor's blood dripped down the glass chain. Each drop struck Tavia's shadow and hissed into smoke. He looked at the black links biting into her darkness, then at the mark burning through the fabric over her left shoulder where the opened lock had placed its cost. His rage wanted to break everything. Tavia saw it. The whole hall saw it. More importantly, Orathan saw it. So when Kaelor lifted his free hand and dragonfire gathered along his fingers, the High Warden did not flinch. He smiled. Strike me, Orathan said. Give the court the monster we cut out of you. Kaelor froze. The trap was simple because it had been built for him since childhood. If he killed Orathan in fury, the Shadow Council would name the recovered memory a corruption. They would claim the cage had opened and poisoned the king. They would cut Tavia's shadow in the name of saving the realm. Tavia forced herself to breathe through the pain in her shoulder. Do not give him your fire, she said. Kaelor's eyes flicked to her. Not soft, not saved. still burning. But listening, the dragonfire withdrew from his fingers inch by inch. It cost him enough that sweat shone at his temple. The court had feared his violence for years. Tavia began to understand that Orathan feared something else more. Kaelor's obedience ending, Orathan's gaze sharpened. The servant advises the crown now? No, Tavia said. The evidence does. Her shadow moved under the chain. Not far, not freely. Just enough to point toward the wall behind the throne, where no door stood, and yet every lock in the hall had turned. Orathan's expression did not change, but two wardens shifted in front of that wall. Tavia noticed. So did Kaelor. What is behind the throne? Kaelor asked. The royal furnace spine, Orathan answered smoothly. Stonework, old heat vents, nothing that concerns this proceeding. Tavia almost laughed. It hurt too much, so the sound became a breath. Nothing, she repeated. You use that word whenever you mean something taken. Orathan's eyes cut to her. Careful, girl. That was his mistake. Not servant, not vessel, not cage. Yirl. The little word pulled the opened memory closer. The wet black room flickered again inside Kaelor's shadow. Little Tavia's silent tears. Little Kaelor's scream. The dragon flame bending around both of them before the needle turned promise into prison. Tavia looked at her own shadow. Show me what he hid behind the throne. The chain punished her immediately. Glass links tightened. Her shoulder wound flared so violently white spots burst across her vision. Kaelor moved, but she shook her head once. No, ask me first. He stopped again, breathing hard. That was his punishment now. Not pain alone. Restraint. Letting her choose, even when every instinct in him wanted to seize the cost from her hands. What do you need? He asked. Tavia swallowed. Your blood on the lock, not your fire. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He understood the difference. Fire would force. Blood would witness. Kaelor dragged his burned palm down the glass chain until his blood reached the place where Tavia's shadow pointed. The nearest floating lock turned red gold at its edges, then dropped toward the marble with a heavy click. Orathan's calm fractured. Do not open that. Tavia looked at him. Why? Because some doors are sealed to protect the living. Who's living? She asked. No answer. Kaelor pressed his bleeding hand to the lock. It opened. The wall behind the throne split without breaking. Stone folded inward like a mouth remembering how to speak. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of wet ash, old milk, and iron. A stairway appeared. Narrow, black, descending west beneath the throne. The sealed west stair. The court recoiled at last. Not with noise, but with bodies stepping away from the truth, as if it had heat. Even the wardens lowered their eyes. Tavia's shadow strained toward the stair so fiercely the chain dragged across marble. Orathan lifted the blade again. Contain the cage. The wardens threw two more glass chains. Kaelor caught one across his forearm before it struck Tavia's shadow. The links burned through cloth into skin, but he wrapped them around his arm and pulled, anchoring the pain in himself. The second chain struck Tavia's darkness and pinned it harder. She bit back a cry. Behind the black glass, the dragon memory growled. Not to attack, to warn. Do not open all, it said. The cage breaks if the hunger returns at once. Tavia closed her eyes for one heartbeat. A cage, a key, a door. A girl who had been made useful by men who called survival a gift. What is the hunger? She asked. Orathan answered before the dragon could. Royal dragon, will without command, desire without law, fire without obedience. The dragon memory's golden eyes narrowed. Grief, it said. The word moved through the hall like smoke. Kaelor went still. The dragon continued, voice rough against the cracked glass. They did not cut out his danger. They cut out his grief. A grieving dragon cannot be governed. The open stair breathed colder. From below came a sound. Not crying this time. Whispering. Many voices, soft and layered, speaking from behind doors under the palace. Children. Servants. Maybe nobles once. Maybe enemies. Maybe everyone the Shadow Council had made into rooms. Tavia's shadow reached toward them. Pain spread through her body in answer, but with it came knowledge. Not full memory. Not yet. A rule. One lock, one wound. One door, one choice. She could not open the stair by accident. She had to choose what the door was allowed to reveal. Orathen saw understanding settle over her face and struck where he could. "If you descend," he said, "every sealed thing beneath this palace will know you. Every prisoner, every cut memory, every royal crime, they will pull at you until there is no girl left. Only hinges." Kaelor took one step toward him. "Threaten her again." Tavia raised her hand. Kaelor stopped. She looked at Orathen, then at the stair behind the throne. "No," she said. "Let him speak." Orathen blinked. Tavia's voice steadied. "Let him tell the court what waits below. If he lies, the door can answer." The sealed stair gave a low groan, as if amused. For the first time, Orathen looked at Tavia as more than a vessel. He looked at her as someone who could force law to turn against its maker. His blade lowered a fraction. "There are rooms beneath this palace," he said carefully, "where unstable shadows were stored to preserve the crown." "How many?" Tavia asked. No answer. Her shadow pulled once against the chain. A sound rose from the stair. Dozens of locks clicking in the dark. Kaelor's face hardened. "How many?" Orathen looked from the king to Tavia, then to the open stair. His mouth tightened around a truth he could not bury fast enough. "Enough," he said, "that if she opens them, your kingdom will learn it was built with no shadows of its own." The stairway below the throne lit one step at a time. And from the deepest dark, a child's voice whispered, "Tavia, you still have mine." The child's voice rose from the open stair, and Tavia's shadow pulled so hard the glass chain carved sparks from the marble. Kaelor caught the chain before it tore her off her feet. The movement was instinctive, but this time he did not close his hand around her shadow. He caught the chain itself, taking the burn into his own palm, anchoring the force without claiming the choice. The links glowed white against his skin. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. Tavia heard the difference in his silence. Before, he had used her pain as a door. Now he stood at the edge of it and waited for her to decide whether it should open. The stair beneath the throne breathed again. One cold step after another lit with thin silver lines, descending into a dark the palace had lied about for years. Behind each line, something clicked. Locks answering locks. Doors hearing her shadow. The voices below did not scream. That made them worse. They whispered like children trained not to wake their keepers. "Tavia, you still have mine." Her chest hurt as if the words had been stored there, and only now remembered how to wound. Orathen moved toward the stair, but Kaelor shifted one step and blocked him. "No farther," the Dragon King said. The High Warden's expression hardened. "Majesty, if she answers those voices, the lower vaults will recognize her as active containment. Every sealed shadow beneath this palace will reach for her. She cannot bear it. You made her bear mine. We made her useful." The chain in Kaelor's hand cracked. Tavia looked at him sharply. "Do not." His breath came slow, controlled through the fury burning under his skin. "I know." 2 words. Not enough to redeem him. Enough to show he was learning where not to put his fire. Tavia turned toward the stair. "What waits below?" she asked. The dragon memory behind the black glass lowered its golden eyes. The cracked barrier still held it, but every word it spoke made the glass tremble. Rooms without bodies. Shadows without owners. Names cut from children before they could become dangerous. Orathen snapped. Royal threats, not children. Tavia's shadow jerked toward him, and all the locks in the hall clicked once. The High Warden went still. Tavia understood then that her shadow was not only a door, it was a listener. It knew when a sealed room had been insulted. It knew when a lie walked too close to a lock. She looked at Orathen. "Say that again." His eyes narrowed. "Call them threats again," she said. "Let the doors decide if that is true." For the first time, Orathen chose silence. A strange satisfaction moved through Tavia, small and bright beneath the pain. Not cruelty, not victory, recognition. All her life, powerful men had made her quiet by placing consequences around her throat. Now one of them had swallowed his own words because her shadow had given consequence back. Kaelor looked at her, and something unreadable passed across his face. Not admiration alone, not pity. Fear, perhaps, not of her, but of what had been done to her while he sat on a throne built above the evidence. Tavia faced the stair again. I am not opening every room. The whispers below shifted. Disappointment. Hunger. Hope. She felt all of it press against her shadow until the chain hummed. Her body could not survive all of them. She knew that without Orathan telling her. Each locked room wanted a way out. Each severed shadow wanted to be held by something living. If she opened herself too far, she would become exactly what Orathan named her, a cage with no girl left inside it. One door, she said. The dragon memory's eyes narrowed in approval. Orathan's face tightened. Choose wrong, and you rupture the foundation seals. Then tell me which door you fear most. He smiled thinly. That is not how law works. No, Tavia said. That is how guilt works. The stair lit 3 more steps. From the dark below, a small lock rose into the hall. It was not iron like the others. It was bone white, shaped like a child's closed fist. It floated through the air and stopped before Tavia's shadow. Kaelor stared at it. His face lost color. You know that lock, Tavia said. He swallowed once. I think I made it. Orathan's voice cut in quickly. The prince was delirious after the separation rite. Anything he remembers from that night is contaminated. Tavia did not look away from Kaelor. Did you make it? Kaelor's eyes closed for one breath. When he opened them, they were gold around the edges. I remember blood on my hands, he said. Not from a wound, from biting my own palm so I would not scream. I remember a girl crying without sound. I remember giving her something because they were taking too much. His gaze dropped to the bone-white lock. I do not remember what. The child's voice from below whispered again. You gave me your door. Tavia's knees weakened. Not from the chain this time. From the sudden ache of almost memory. A small hand pressing something into her shadow. A boy's voice, hoarse from screaming. Hide it. Do not let him find it. Not him. Not the warden. Orathan stepped forward. That lock is irrelevant to the king's stability. Every lock in the hall turned toward him. Tavia almost smiled despite the pain. The doors disagree. The bone-white lock opened before she touched it. The cost hit Kaelor first. He staggered, clutching his throat as if invisible fingers had forced words back into him. Then Tavia felt the answering wound in her own mouth, a burning line across her tongue. She tasted ash and childhood terror. The memory unfolded in the air between them. Not the stone room this time. A corridor, the sealed west stair, but smaller, sharper, seen through a child's frightened eyes. Young Kaelor ran barefoot down the steps, dragging little Tavia by the hand. Both children were shaking. Behind them, wardens shouted. Black glass bells rang from the walls. The boy's shadow flickered violently, half dragon-shaped, half torn. The little girl's shadow carried something bright and locked inside it. At the bottom of the stair stood a door painted red. Tavia knew that door, not with her mind, with every nightmare she had never been allowed to keep. Young Kaelor shoved little Tavia behind him as Orathan appeared above them on the stair. Give back what you hid, the younger Orathan said. The boy lifted his bleeding hand and pressed it to the red door. No, young Kaelor whispered. The red door opened just enough to show darkness beyond. Not empty darkness, waiting darkness. Young Kaelor turned to little Tavia. His face was streaked with tears and fury. If they make me forget you, he said, keep the door. Little Tavia shook her head, terrified. He gripped her hand tighter. Please. The memory trembled. In the Ember Hall, Kaelor made a sound, as if the word had gone through his ribs. Tavia watched her younger self nod. The boy bent and pressed his bloodied palm against her shadow. A small door appeared there, the same door now hidden beneath every law Orathan had built. Then wardens seized them both. The memory shattered before the red door could open wider. Tavia came back to the hall with her tongue burning and tears cold on her face. Kaelor stood a few steps away, breathing hard, no longer touching the chain. Not because he had abandoned her, because he was afraid of what his hands had already done. Orathan lifted the silver blade. Now you see the danger. The king gave royal access to a servant child. She has carried an illegal door inside her shadow since that night. By law, she must be sealed below before every vault recognizes her. Tavia looked at the bone-white lock hanging open before her. Then she looked at the red darkness at the bottom of the stair. What is behind the red door? Orathan's expression went blank. That was answer enough. Kaelor's voice was low. Tavia. She turned to him. He did not say, "Do not open it." He did not command her to step away. He only stood there with blood on both hands and memory returning like punishment. "What do you want?" he asked. The question steadied her more than comfort would have. Tavia looked down at her shadow. It no longer strained toward every lock. It pointed toward one, the red door below the throne. "I want the door I kept," she said. The stare answered. Far beneath the Ember Hall, the red door opened by a finger's width, and from behind it came Kaelor's forgotten voice, older than the child, colder than the king. "Hide her from me before I become what they made." Kaelor's forgotten voice came from behind the red door, and the man standing in the Ember Hall stopped breathing. "Hide her from me before I become what they made." The words did not echo like memory. They obeyed the room like an order still alive. Every torch in the hall bent away from Kaelor. The shadow chain around Tavia's darkness tightened until the glass links hummed with panic. Far beneath the throne, the red door opened another finger's width, and something cold slipped up the sealed west stair. Not wind, not smoke, but a command old enough to have survived being buried. Tavia felt it touch her shadow. Hide. The instinct struck so violently that her body moved before thought. Her darkness folded inward, pulling away from every lock, every door, every watching eye. The silver circle dimmed around her feet. The opened memory inside Kaelor's shadow flickered. Orathan saw it and smiled. "There," he said softly. "Even the old command knows she must be hidden." Kaelor turned on him. "What did you make me say? We made you wise enough to protect the realm from yourself." "No." Tavia's voice came out rough, but it cut through the hall. "You made him afraid of what you put inside him." The red door below answered with a low thud. One step on the sealed stair went dark. Kaelor looked toward Tavia, and for one painful moment she saw it the fear Orathan had buried under crown and command. Not fear of death, not fear of losing power, fear of touching her wrong, fear that whatever waited behind the red door had been born in him and would turn toward her first. He took one step back. The movement hurt more than the chain. Orathan lifted the silver blade. "Majesty understands at last. The servant must be removed from proximity. If the old command wakes fully, the king's buried will may seek to complete what it once feared." Kaelor's jaw clenched. He did not deny it quickly enough. Tavia held his gaze. "Is that what you remember?" she asked. "That you would hurt me?" His throat moved. "I remember begging them to hide you. That is not the same thing." "It might be." The answer was honest. It still was not enough. Tavia looked down at her shadow, folded tight beneath the glass chain because a child's command had told it to hide. For years she had obeyed that command without knowing it. She had stayed unnoticed, stayed useful, stayed small. She had walked around, sealed doors without touching them, swallowed questions before they became danger, survived by becoming a room no one searched. The command had protected her. It had also imprisoned her. Tavia drew a breath and spoke to the darkness at her feet. "Do not hide." The shadow did not move. Pain pulsed through her shoulder, where the first lock had opened. The wound on her tongue burned from the second. Her body knew the cost of disobedience before her mind did. This was not only a spell, it was a childhood promise wrapped around terror. A boy had begged. A girl had obeyed. A council had turned that obedience into law. Tavia lowered herself to one knee. Kaelor moved toward her, but she lifted her bound hands as far as she could. "Stay." He stopped, visibly shaken by the word. Not because he was king, because she was choosing. Tavia bent toward her pinned shadow. "You kept me alive," she whispered, "but I am not a hidden room anymore." The glass chain shook. Orathan's smile faded. "She cannot countermand a royal preservation order," he said. "The command was spoken by dragon blood." Tavia looked at him. "To protect me, to conceal you." "No." Her voice steadied. "You used protection. As a lock." The red door below groaned. The dragon memory behind the black glass pressed its golden eyes toward her. "One command can be broken by the one it was meant to save." Orathan snapped, "Silence that thing." The wardens pulled the chains again. Tavia's shadow tore outward. This time, she did scream. Not from weakness, from the raw shock of something inside her refusing to split quietly. Kaelor took one step, then stopped himself so hard his boots scraped against marble. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Blood ran from both palms where restraint had reopened every burn. He was paying. Not enough. But truly, what price? Tavia asked the dragon, memory through clenched teeth. To break the hiding command, it said, you must show what hiding cost. The third lock drifted down from the air. It was small and red, shaped like a closed eye. Tavia understood before it touched her. This wound would not cut flesh. It would take the mercy of forgetting. Kaelor understood too. No. Tavia looked at him. You asked what I want. His face tightened. I want to know what I lost. The red lock opened. Memory struck her like cold water poured into a grave. Years unfolded in flashes. Tavia at 13, standing outside the sealed west stair with a bucket in her hands, unable to remember why she was crying. Tavia at 16, waking from dreams of a boy's hand in hers and scrubbing the laundry stones until her nails split because work was easier than questions. Tavia at 19, seeing Kaelor pass through the lower hall after a battle, bleeding from the side, and feeling her shadow reach for him before she forced it still. Then worse. Every time her shadow had tried to point toward truth, pain had folded her away from it. Every time someone spoke Kaelor's childhood name, her tongue had gone numb. Every time she came close to remembering the red door, she had forgotten something else instead. A song her mother used to hum. The shape of her own 7th birthday. The sound of her laugh before the palace taught her quiet. Tavia gasped. Kaelor's face broke. Not beautifully. Not romantically. Like a man watching the damage of his survival counted in pieces of another person's life. Orathan seized the moment. You see? The command spared her worse. Open the red door and she loses the rest. No, Tavia whispered. She stood slowly. Her shadow unfolded beneath the chain. Not free. Awake. The command did not spare me, she said. It taught me to disappear whenever truth came close. The red door below the throne opened wider. A new memory rose through it. Not from Tavia this time, but from Kaelor. He stood older in the vision. Not a child. Not yet the king he was now. A prince on his knees before Orathan, hands bound in black glass, eyes burning gold with a grief too large for his body. I remember her, young Kaelor said. There was a girl. Orathan placed one hand on his bowed head. There was a threat. No, a girl. A cage, Orathan corrected gently. And if you seek her, you will open what we sealed. You will kill what you tried to save. Young Kaelor shook with silent fury. Then he looked up. Hide her from me, he said, voice breaking into the command Tavia had carried for years. Before I become what they made. The memory shifted. Orathan smiled, and added words the prince had never spoken. Until she forgets how to open. The hall went cold. Kaelor stared at the High Warden. Tavia felt the last piece settle. Kaelor had begged for distance. Orathan had turned it into erasure. Kaelor had feared harming her. Orathan had made her harm herself by hiding. The red door below the throne opened fully. From behind it came hundreds of shadows pressed against the dark, each one holding a small stolen memory like a candle cupped in both hands. And the first shadow stepped through wearing Tavia's forgotten laugh. The first shadow stepped through the red door wearing Tavia's forgotten laugh, and the sound struck the ember hall harder than fire. It was not loud. That made it worse. It came small and bright from a shape no taller than a child, a shadow with no face, no bones, no flesh, holding a silver flicker cupped between its hands. The laugh trembled there like a candle protected from wind. Tavia knew it before memory gave it back to her. She knew it in the ache behind her ribs, in the sudden sting behind her eyes, in the hollow place where joy had once been removed so cleanly she had mistaken the wound for nature. She had laughed like that once, before the palace taught her silence. The shadow crossed the threshold and reached for her. Kaelor moved, then stopped himself. The restraint hurt him. She saw it in the way his body angled toward her, in the way his hand opened and closed at his side. He wanted to stand between Tavia and everything coming through that door. But this was not an arrow, not a blade, not a beast. This was something stolen from her, and he had no right to take its return from her hands. Tavia stepped forward until the glass chain around her shadow screamed against the marble. The little shadow lifted the silver laugh. When it touched Tavia's chest, she remembered. A courtyard under winter sun. A scrap of stolen honey cake hidden in her sleeve. A boy in a prince's sleeping robe trying to look solemn while ash dust covered his nose. He had told her dragons did not sneeze. Then he had sneezed so hard his own shadow startled backward. Tavia had laughed until she fell onto the cold stones. The memory entered her gently. The cost did not. Pain flashed through her throat. The servant cord binding her wrists tightened as if offended by the sound returning to her. She gasped, and the laugh inside her cracked into a sob. Kaelor's face went white. Orathan did not waste the moment. "Witness contamination," he declared. "Returned fragments are unstable. The vessel is absorbing unauthorized shadows in open court. By containment law, she must be sealed below, before the vaults empty into her." The wardens moved. Kaelor drew his sword. Not fire. Steel. The blade rang free with a sound that made the nearest guards step back. Orathan's eyes narrowed. "Will you cut down your own court for her?" Kaelor looked at Tavia before he answered. "Not to ask permission to defend her, to let her see the cost. If they touch her shadow again," he said, "I will cut the chain first, then the hands holding it." Tavia's heart struck once. Hard. Orathan smiled thinly. "Break the chain, and the vault will pour through her." Kaelor did not look away from Tavia. "Then I will not break it unless she chooses." The words shifted something in the hall. Not enough to save them, enough to matter. Tavia looked toward the red door. More shadows pressed behind it, each holding a stolen fragment. A song, a name, a first step, a mother's face, a child's last dream before shadow separation. Not all were hers. She felt that instantly. The vault below did not hold only pieces of Tavia. It held pieces of everyone the Shadow Council had made useful. Every shadow wanted a living door. Every fragment wanted a home. If she let them all through, Orathan would be right about one thing. There would be no Tavia left. Only a hallway filled with other people's grief. She lifted her bound hands toward the red door. "Stop." The shadows obeyed. The entire court felt it. The wardens froze. The locks in the Ember Hall clicked softly. Even the dragon memory behind black glass lowered its head, golden eyes fixed on her with something like sorrow. Tavia had not commanded as a queen. She had spoken as the cage choosing what would not be devoured. Orathan's expression hardened. "You cannot hold them back forever." "No," Tavia said. "But I can choose who speaks first." She turned toward the little shadow that had brought her laugh. It stood beside her now, dark and delicate, no longer holding light. Waiting. "Who took it?" Tavia asked. The shadow pointed, not at Orathan, at the 6 veiled counselors standing in the memory still open behind Kaelor's darkness. One by one, the veils in the memory burned away. The old Shadow Council faces appeared, pale and severe, each marked with a small black lock beneath the left eye. The court recognized some of them. Tavia heard the shift, the swallowed names. Dead grandfathers, retired judges, founders of noble houses that still wore their rings in this very hall. Orathan's trap was larger than himself. Good. Tavia wanted the room to see how large. "Name the law," she said. Orathan's gaze snapped to her. "What? You keep saying law. Name the first law that allowed this." For the first time, he hesitated. Kaelor's sword lowered slightly. Not in surrender, but in understanding. Tavia was not asking for explanation. She was forcing the foundation into view. The red door breathed below the throne. A lock rose from the stair, black and square, shaped like a judge's seal. It turned toward Orathan. The High Warden's mouth thinned. "The first preservation statute," he said. "In times of royal instability, non-noble vessels may be used to preserve crown continuity." The hall went silent. "Non-noble vessels." Tavia felt the words crawl over her skin. Beside her, Kaelor looked as if he might be sick. "Used," she repeated. Orathan lifted his chin. The realm survived. Tavia looked at the shadow holding her forgotten laugh, then at the red door crowded with stolen pieces. "No," she said. The realm was taught to call survival whatever nobles kept. The judge seal lock opened. This time the cost did not strike Tavia. It struck the court. Every noble wearing a family ring marked by the old Shadow Council cried out as black heat burned beneath the left eye. The same small lock appeared on their skin, proof not of guilt alone, but inheritance. They had not all held the needle, but their houses had fed on what the needle made. Orathan's face tightened. Kaelor stared across the hall. How many houses knew? The opened lock answered with a sound like pages turning in a tomb. On the black marble floor, shadows stretched from noble feet toward Tavia, each one carrying a sealed mark. Not doors. Debts. Tavia understood the next rule. Doors remembered rooms. Locks remembered owners. And debts remembered who profited. Orathan shouted, "Do not let her read them." The wardens lunged. Kaelor moved first. He did not kill them. He struck the first warden's blade aside, drove his shoulder into the second, and slammed his sword hilt into the third's wrist hard enough to break the grip on Tavia's chain. Each move was controlled, brutal, and costly. No dragonfire. No royal rage. Just a king choosing not to become the monster Orathan needed. Tavia used the opening. She stepped onto her own pinned shadow. Pain surged through her, but the chain slackened for one breath. She reached toward the red door and chose one debt. Not the largest. The nearest. A noble woman near the front screamed as her shadow peeled open like a scroll. Inside it, a memory appeared. A little servant boy being led down the sealed west stair, while his mother begged outside a locked kitchen door. The noblewoman's family crest hung above the warden, who signed him away. The boy's stolen shadow waited behind the red door, holding his mother's name. Tavia turned to Orathan. "This is why you fear me," she said. "Not because I am the cage." The red door opened wider behind her. "Because cages, remember who built them." From the deepest stair, another lock rose. This one was shaped like Kaelor's crown, and it was already open. The crown-shaped lock rose from the sealed stair, already open. Kaelor looked at it as if it had been waiting for him longer than the throne. It was small enough to fit in a child's hand, black iron edged with ember gold, shaped like the crown on his brow but crueler, older, built not to rule a kingdom but to close around a mind. It floated between the red door and the throne, turning slowly until its open mouth faced the Dragon King. Then the ember steel crown on Kaelor's head answered. A hidden latch snapped. Blood slid from beneath the crown's jagged rim. Tavia saw the pain strike him before anyone else moved. His shoulders did not bow. His sword did not fall. But something tightened behind his eyes, deep and brutal, as if the crown had grown teeth into the thoughts beneath his skull. Orathan stepped forward with quiet satisfaction. "There is the final safeguard," he said. "If the king's buried will rises against lawful containment. The crown preserves the realm by closing what should never have opened." Kaelor's hand lifted toward the crown, then stopped. Tavia understood why. If he tore it off in rage, Orathan would call him unstable. If he burned it, the court would call him corrupted. If she opened the crown lock without knowing the cost, it might break whatever remained of the boy whose memories had already been cut apart and stitched into her shadow. The trap was not around his head. It was around every choice he could make. Tavia's shadow strained toward the lock, but she held herself still. The pain from the open red door still burned inside her chest. Behind her, the stolen shadows waited, crowded beyond the threshold, each holding pieces of lives the palace had used and renamed as law. She looked at Kaelor. "What does it hold?" Orathan answered for him. "Royal volatility." Tavia did not take her eyes off the king. "I asked him." The hall went silent in a way that felt dangerous. Kaelor's mouth tightened. Blood reached his temple and slid down the side of his face. "I do not know." "Then what do you want shown?" The question struck him harder than the crown. For a moment he looked almost lost. Not weak, not softened, but stripped of the habits that had made him king. No command came. No order. No claim over her shadow. Only a man with blood on his face and a lock above his mind, being asked to choose truth, even if it condemned him. "Not innocence," he said at last. Orathan's gaze sharpened. Kaelor looked toward the red door, then toward the shadows waiting behind Tavia. "Show what I ordered after they crowned me. If I ruled with this lock on my head, let the court see what I still chose." Tavia felt the weight of it. That was not apology. It was judgment turned inward. The crown-shaped lock drifted closer to her shadow. "What price?" she asked. The dragon memory behind the cracked black glass lowered its golden eyes. One command for one silence. Kaelor understood before she did. His hand rose slow and deliberate, and he removed the ember steel crown from his head. The court recoiled. No dragon king took off his crown before council, nobles, wardens, and servants. The crown was not ornament. It was throne right, furnace law, conquest, threat. Without it, Kaelor looked taller and more wounded, less like a kingdom and more like a man who had finally stopped hiding behind one. He held the crown out. Not to Tavia's head, to her shadow. "I give the silence," he said. The lock opened. Kaelor dropped to one knee as if invisible hands had closed around his throat. He did not cry out. That made the cost feel worse. The silence taken from him poured into the hall like black water, heavy with words he had tried to speak and been punished for remembering. The memory rose from the open crown lock. Kaelor stood younger in the ember hall, newly crowned, his face cold with a grief the court had trained into stillness. The crown sat bright and cruel on his brow. Orathan stood at his right hand. Before them knelt a line of shadow-bound servants, accused of unstable darkness. Tavia saw herself among them. 17, perhaps, thin from lower hall labor, eyes lowered, hands raw from ash water. Her shadow tucked close to her feet as if it had learned fear from her body. Young Kaelor looked at her. Recognition flickered. The crown clicked. His expression emptied. "Transfer the girl to lower service," young Kaelor ordered. "Keep her away from sealed stairs, furnace chambers, and royal shadow rites." Tavia's chest tightened. It was not rescue. It was not cruelty either. It was a locked mind trying to protect someone it had been trained not to remember. The memory continued. After the servants were led away, young Kaelor gripped the throne until his knuckles whitened. His voice changed, becoming raw beneath the crown's command. "If I ask for her again," he said, each word dragging blood from his nose, "bring me the full record. Do not answer me with law. Bring me proof." Orathan bowed. "As your majesty commands." But when young Kaelor collapsed from the backlash, Orathan took the record scroll from the clerk. He burned it in the royal brazier. The memory vanished. In the ember hall, no one spoke. Tavia looked at Kaelor kneeling without his crown, one hand braced on the marble, blood falling from his brow. Her anger did not disappear. It became more exact. He had been used. He had also ruled. He had protected her badly, from a distance, through orders filtered by men who twisted every mercy into another prison. Both truths stood between them. Kaelor lifted his head. "I gave an order." Tavia's voice was quiet. "And he burned the record." The crown lock turned toward Orathan. That was the moment the court understood. Not all of it. Not the depth of stolen shadows. Not the horror of children made into rooms. Not Tavia's years of forgetting herself. But they understood treason against royal record. They understood a high warden destroying a king's command. Orathan's face went still. Kaelor rose slowly, crown still in his bloodied hand. "High Warden Orathan," he said, voice rough from the silence he had paid. "Answer the record you destroyed." For the first time, Orathan did not hide behind calm. He crushed a black seal in his fist. The red door below the throne opened without Tavia's permission. Every stolen shadow in the palace turned toward the cage. The broken seal dragged the first shadow through the red door before Tavia could choose. It struck her chest like a thrown stone of memory. A woman's last song filled her throat. A boy's fear buckled her knees. A stolen name burned against her tongue, then another, each one trying to enter the cage Orathan had forced open. The red door below the throne yawned wide, no longer answering Tavia's will. Shadows poured up the sealed stair, thin and torn and hungry for the only living place the council had taught them to recognize. Tavia staggered inside the cracked silver circle. Kaelor threw the ember steel crown onto the marble between her and the rushing darkness. It hit the floor with a sound like a broken bell. Blood from his brow dripped onto its jagged rim, and the crown lock flared red gold, slowing the first wave before it could crush her beneath stolen lives. He dropped to one knee and pressed both burned hands to the stone. "By my blood," he said, voice rough but clear. "No shadow enters her without her choosing." Orathan shouted from near the throne. "You have no crown on your head." Kaelor lifted his face. "No," he said. "For the first time I have my head without the crown." The word struck through the hall. Nobles marked by black lock brands went pale. Wardens tightened their grips on useless chains. The dragon memory behind the shattered black glass lowered its massive head, golden eyes fixed on Tavia. Not commanding. Waiting. Tavia forced air into her lungs. Every shadow pressed toward her. Child shadows, servant shadows, noble shadows, war shadows. Half-formed pieces of people who had been cut apart and stored beneath the palace so the court could keep calling itself stable. She could not hold them all. And she would not let Orathan turn that truth into another claim. She lifted her bound hands. Stop. The shadows stopped. Not because she was stronger than grief, because she was the first person to ask it to wait. A silence opened across the Ember Hall. Tavia looked toward the red door. "No one enters me by force." The door trembled. "One at a time," she said. "One truth. One witness. No more cages." The dragon memory exhaled, and the furnace flames turned white. Orathan's face hardened. He saw the court shifting. He saw clerks reaching for ink. He saw noble houses marked by the old crime. He saw Kaelor kneeling crownless before a servant girl, and not ordering her, not claiming her, not turning her pain into proof. So he chose the only thing left to him. He tried to destroy the witness. The silver blade flew from his hand toward Tavia's shadow. Kaelor lungel, but the blade was faster. Tavia did not step back. She opened the smallest lock. The bone-white child's fist split apart in the air before the blade. The silver edge vanished into it. Then memory answered. The wet black room unfolded across the hall. Young Orathan stood over two children with the black glass needle in his hand. The court saw the prince screaming for the servant girl to be spared. They saw the dragon flame bend around both shadows as promise, not prison. They saw Orathan drive the needle through that promise and twist it into a lock. The blade dropped harmlessly to the floor. Ink began writing on every scroll in the hall. No clerk touched it. Names returned in black lines. Burned orders reformed. House crests cracked on noble rings. The old Shadow Council's records crawled across the walls in ash and blood, naming every child taken, every servant sealed, every noble family that had profited from a stolen shadow. Tavia turned to the wardens holding her chain. "Release my shadow." They looked to Kaelor. Tavia's voice sharpened. "Not because he commands it, because the record has answered." One warden dropped his chain, then another. The last held on until his own shadow opened beneath him and showed a little boy being led down the west stair under his family seal. "Let go." Tavia's shadow snapped back to her feet. Pain tore through her, one final white-hot line, but this time it did not feel like breaking. It felt like returning to her own shape. The black glass behind the dragon memory split completely. Kaelor turned, ready for ruin. But the dragon did not rush into him. It lowered its enormous head before Tavia's shadow. Gold burned beneath its black glass scales, wounded and ancient, but its eyes were clear. "You held what they made you hold," it said. "Now choose what opens." Tavia looked at Kaelor. He stood crownless, bleeding, waiting. No claim, no command, no demand hidden beneath tenderness. Only the terrible knowledge that if she chose to close every door and leave him in the ruins, he would have to let her. Her heart hurt, not forgiveness, not yet, but something alive beneath the ash. Tavia faced the red door. Open the rooms enough for every shadow to return to its owner. If the owner is dead, give the memory to the record. If the owner's house profited, mark the debt. If the pain belongs to me, I decide when to carry it. The red door opened carefully. Shadows moved one by one. Some entered trembling nobles, who fell beneath memories their houses had buried. Some dissolved into scrolls. Some rose toward the dragon-bone ceiling like smoke, finally finding sky. The little shadow wearing Tavia's forgotten laugh stayed beside her until the end, then touched her hand and disappeared into her. This time, the memory returned without pain. Tavia laughed once through tears. Small, broken, Herse. Orathan tried to run toward the west wall. Every lock in the Ember Hall turned. Every door shut against him. Kaelor lifted his sword, but Tavia raised one hand. No. He stopped. She looked at Orathan. the man who had made her a cage and called it purpose. Not death, she said. Record. Her shadow crossed the marble and opened beneath his feet not a pit, but a room of living memory. Every stolen shadow he had sealed turned its face toward him. You will remember all of them, Tavia said, one by one, until the last name is returned. The record room closed around him. No scream escaped, only ink. When dawn reached the Ember Hall, the throne still stood, but the sealed west stair remained open. The Shadow Council banners had fallen. Noble houses marked by debt waited under guard. The stolen rooms beneath the palace were no longer hidden. Kaelor stood beside Tavia at the broken silver circle. He did not touch her until she looked at his hand. Even then, he only offered it. I cannot ask you to stay, he said. No, Tavia answered. You cannot. His fingers curled slightly, accepting the wound of that truth. She looked toward the open stair where shadows were still finding their way home. But I am not leaving my doors with your court. For the first time since the blade touched her shadow, Kaelor almost smiled. Not with victory. With hope he knew he had not earned yet. Then the court will answer to you. Tavia looked at the broken crown at her feet. I do not want your crown. I know. I do not want to be your cage. His voice lowered. Never again. She believed that he meant it. She did not yet know if meaning it was enough. So Tavia stepped past the crown and placed his hand over the first returned record. Start here, she said. Kaelor looked down at the name written in ashen blood. Then he knelt beside her, not to claim her, not to crown her, not to make the court witness a romance born from ruin. He knelt to read. Behind them, the dragon memory unfolded from shadow into dawnlight, no longer trapped behind glass, no longer forced into blood. It curled around the open stair like a guardian of doors, and for the first time in the history of the Dragon Court, no lock turned without being asked. Tavia's shadow rested at her feet, whole, waiting, hers.